Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's sermon prep. This week, we're going to be celebrating the 27th Sunday in Ordinary Time in Year C. Our first reading is from the book of the prophet Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 2 to 3, and chapter 2, verse 2 to 4. While our responsorial psalm is Psalm 95, verses 1 to 2, and then 6 to 7. And our second reading is taken from the second letter of St. Paul to Timothy. So it's second letter of Timothy, chapter 1, verses 6 to 8, and then 13 to 14. In our gospel reading, we are still reading from St. Luke. Luke chapter 17, verses 5 to 10. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or how long will I cry out violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrong and look upon trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contentions arise. How many of us have had that prayer? To say, God, it's just not going well, but you are also quiet, you are silent. We're trying to make means ends, but things are just not working, but our God remains silent. We see other people suffering injustice. Good people, good men and women who fear the Lord, who put the Lord before all else in their lives. And the more they stick their faith to God, the more it seems as if trouble follows them. And God seems to be silent. And in this reading, at least God gets an opportunity to answer. It says, behold, he whose soul is not upright, in him shall fail, but the righteous one shall live by his faith. And that's the good thing about faith, is that even when everything else seems to be going wrong, even when nothing seems to be making sense, even if we feel we are in the midst of a tumult, our faith is what sustains us. We know that there's a better day. We know that things are going to be better. We know that is not the end. So even when it becomes difficult, even when it becomes challenging, our faith does not fail us. What we want, God allows to continue. So that's our first reading from the prophet Habakkuk. And our responsorial psalm, the response to the psalm is, oh, that today you would listen to his voice. Harden not your hearts. The second stanza, oh, come, let us bow and bend low. Let us kneel before the God who made us, for he is our God, and we, the people who belong to his pasture, the flock that is led by his hand. The psalm remembers the people of the children of Israel as they make their journey through the desert at Massa and Meribah, where they tested God. And the psalmist is saying, today if God speaks to you, harden not your heart, because that's where some of us lose our faith. God constantly speaks. God is constantly talking to us, but our hearts seem to be so hard. Sometimes they are hardened by the situations that we face. And then we lose faith. Then we lose heart. And then God speaks to us, and somehow it becomes a silent voice. In our second reading, St. Paul says to Timothy, I remind you to rekindle the gift of God that is in you, that is within you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power and love and self-control. Do not be afraid or ashamed to testify to our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but take your share of suffering from the gospel in the power of God. St. Paul is saying to Timothy that don't forget that gift of faith that God has given you. And do not allow the situations of this world to make you doubt or second guess that faith. or want to be silent in that faith. Allow God to work through you. Do not be afraid or ashamed of speaking of the Lord. And sometimes we face that because things become so difficult, and whenever we speak of God, others are going to say, well, if God is around, why are you in such a situation? And then we second guess him, we doubt him, we feel that we need to be quiet. St. Paul is saying, don't do that. Don't be afraid of speaking about God. Don't be ashamed about God. Somehow that is what rekindles our faith. And if you think about it, people who motivate us the most are people who have been suffering but did not give up. A typical motivational speaker is exactly that. A person who faced hell but somehow continued to go on. And that's what St. Paul is telling young Timothy in our second reading. And in our gospel reading, the apostles say to Jesus, increase our faith. And the Lord said, if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, you would say to that sycamore tree, be rooted up and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. I like how Jesus makes it so easy. Maybe it's because it is that easy. Because within our hearts and within our minds, once we say it, once we believe in it, it could happen. And that's exactly what faith is. Jesus is saying that faith goes beyond even what we can imagine. If we can believe it, Jesus is saying that it can happen. So this week we are speaking about that gift of faith and how we should never let that light of faith go out. How we should never let that light which Jesus enkindles in us of faith to run out. And once we have faith, Jesus says it can be as little as a mustard seed. It can do great things for us. Now this week, this is not what we're going to be speaking about. Remember that it's our first week of a glance at Mass, where we're going to be looking at the Eucharist, or the celebration of Mass, for the next 4 weeks. But for your spiritual health, those are the readings that the rest of the Catholic world are going to be listening to this week. So I hope to see you guys on Sunday. I know some in person, some are online. You take care of yourself. Cheerios and goodbye.